Evening, everybody. Looks like we're up and running. And we are up and running. Hey, Chris. All right. Hey, Martin and Dina.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and even more.
Hey, Linda, Lorena, and Ellen.
Rhythms, all danceable.
Evening all around.
Room of the Congress Hotel.
Whoa, by like 9 at once. Hey, Ann, Cindy, Bruce, Timothy, Laura, Eric, Laura, Juanita, Ann, Jeanette, Rose, and Bob. The bats are back. Oh, I've got the wrong screen, though. The bats are back. We got some leaves up there. Hey, Marisol and Marie. Marisol. Rebecca, Amy, Ava, Kathy. Next weekend is the big weekend. Hey, Heather. Hey, Chuck down in Blue Ridge. Kind of scattered. I wasn't quite ready to start yet when it was time to start. Hey, Nancy in Denver, Becky, Florecita, Dave and Barb, Kathleen, John, Georgia, Nancy, Benito, Heather. Everything's kind of coming up at once. Hey, Sue. Hey, Jeanette and Christine and Sherry, Jerry, and Randle. Evening, everybody. Rosalinda in Lake Villa. Hey, Cheryl, Jerry, oh, geez. Hey, Trish, Bob. Hey, MJ on YouTube. Spooky season does indeed begin. Oh, I am ready for it. I wasn't quite ready to broadcast, but I just got distracted. It's on me. The show's all ready. Hey, Karen, Mike, Jordana, Ginny. Hey, Katie. Last week's winner. Hey, Kim. Hey, Karen. Hey, Elizabeth in Oregon and Kathleen. Hey, Jan. Hey, Dana. Evening, Kendra. You don't have to call me sir. I'm not a knight of the realm. I disdain such honorifics. One of the first things I tell my school groups, especially the ones who come from down south, is please don't call me. If we go to medieval times, you can call people sir. But out here, you know my name. I'm not a knight. Hey, Dana. Hey, Ellen. The way I was raised, I would consider very patronizing to call somebody sir if you knew their name. Awesome, Ellen. Hey, Jan. Good evening, everybody. Comments kind of slowed. I bet I'm going to get about 12 in a row in a second here. Is Priya still over here? Well, Priya's up and moved. Excellent chance you'll be seeing Priya running back and forth a little bit. Okay, comments are frozen on me. They don't change in a second. I'll switch around a little bit. Last I got is Ellen's. Well, good evening to everybody who's come on since Ellen said she was planning the last part of her trip. I'm guessing there have been comments since then. I'm going to close down my comment window and open it back up again. We'll see how that does. Evening, everybody. How awfully odd. Let me switch over and try. Do I just go to the Facebook app? Oh, there we go. There seems several at once. Hey, Kendra Roberts. Patty, Melissa, Susan, Jan, Jay, Augustin, John, Karen, Timothy, Karen, Kirk, Lee, Denise, Gary. I know you were, Kendra. Hey, Mom. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Donna and Joe. Hey, Dad. Hey, Lori, Megan. Anybody I might have missed? Well, my comments were stuck. Evening, Tracy. Hey, Joe. As I say I love you dearly, for I am yours sincerely, with all my heart. Hey, Patty. I missed your message there, I think. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Emily. Hey, Jean. Break a leg, Patty. Hey, White Bearable over on Twitch. Hey, Nancy. Jacqueline, you can drink anything on the drinking game. You can drink water, whatever. Hey, Cindy in Detroit. I haven't seen the cats yet. Miles has got a cold today, so he might not make an appearance. Priya's around. I can hear Priya in the kitchen running. And yeah, Laura, we're back to Benny. I get notes about this, but whatever. Paula, yes, on Halloween there will be 2 Graceland Cemetery tours. Halloween night, I haven't decided yet. Well, Heather, if you take an edible every time someone says says drink, you're gonna really wish you hadn't by the end of the night. It'll take a while to kick in. It won't kill you, but you'll think you're dead. Hey, Gregory. Hey, Steve. Hey, Jennifer. Yeah, they send me copyright notices on the Benny for when I put it on YouTube, but I don't make money streaming on YouTube anyway, so all my money comes from these links that you see down below, and of course the Patreon, and ticket sales. Hey, Tashera. Hey, Norris over on YouTube. Hey, Heidi and Bucky. T, that where's Jacqueline? Who's they? I think it's YouTube. Just there's a copyright claim. They might monitor you. They might put up. You won't be able to monetize it. But I don't anyway, so hey. Hey, Daniel. I am enjoying some Heaven's Door tonight. Well, yeah, this is the pumpkin spice edition of the mantle. All set up. Kristen, the pumpkin spice got big strictly on the squares of it's a meritocracy, you see. It's because pumpkin spice is awesome. Gin and ginger, that sounds good. Hey, Sherry in Seattle. Hey, Aaron and Ryder. Hey, John. Rosalinda. That's at least you got nice ghosts. I once knew a guy who swore the ghost did his dishes. I'll take some of that. Jenny's has a pumpkin spice ice cream.
And they all loved it. They all loved those.
Why was I notified? I will definitely be hitting a Jenny's very soon. Kelly, this is Benny Goodman live at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, 1936. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Nancy. Hey, Rob. Evening, MJ. We'll give Benny a couple more minutes here before I get started properly. Thanks, MJ. Thanks, Norris. I'm in my 40s, but okay. Hey, Sue. Hey, Rebecca. Hey, Ava and Angela. Now, pumpkin spice Cheerios, that's some good stuff. And if you get the Aldi brand chocolate peanut butter Cheerios, it tastes exactly like E.T. cereal. I'm not even sure how I remember that, because it's been at least 35 years since I was able to get, more than that now, since I was able to get E.T. cereal, but it tastes like it exactly. Pumpkin spice ice cream, yes. Edie's made a really good pumpkin spice ice cream one year. I bought myself a tub and tried to save it until proper October. But then one day my roommate got really high and ate the whole thing. It wasn't a pint, it was the big tub of it. I was so mad. Hey, Grandma Belle. Hey, Amy. I also lately had an ice cream with chocolate cookies in it, and the cookies tasted exactly like the Pepperidge Farm Star Wars cookies that I had maybe once or twice in the early 80s. Apple cider for sure. Trader Joe's spice cider is the best in class. And I get the Farmer's Market cider a lot too, but they get it just right at Joe's. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Mary Rose. Marie. Casey, well put, well put. There's pumpkin everything there. You walk in and it's, I think that last year they told me they had 75 pumpkin products. Be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Alright, that's Benny Goodman wrapping up, so it's 8:02. I think that means it is time for me to get started properly. So, wrong button. Alright, everybody, welcome along. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours with a messy desk behind me, and the all-new October edition of The Mantle. We've got fall leaves all over the place. We got this cool dead branch-looking thing to the right, and we've got all of the bats flying away in a great cloud of bats. It's really super awesome. The show doesn't really do it justice. It's way back over there, but I'll post a picture of it later on or something in proper color. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I have been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for over 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time, so I am incredibly famous. Among my books are Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. Boy, do I get letters about that. Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry. A much less controversial opinion that H.H. Holmes only killed 9 or 10 people. And coming up next year, now in June, there's supply chain issues, so they keep kicking it back. But next June, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets will be out through University of Illinois Press. I've been working on this one for a few years now. It's been my biggest book project since H.H. Holmes. Super excited about this one. Really, really excited to share all of these stories, because there are just so many stories at Graceland Cemetery worth sharing. And of course, I do walking tours there all through October, really all year round in normal years. There's going to be a whole bunch of them this October, but on a walking tour, you can only hit so much. There's only so much time. There's only so many steps most people are able to take. So there are a lot of stories that don't really make it onto the tours very often, no matter how good the stories are. But that's part of why we have virtual tours. In virtual tours, we are not bound by time or space, so we can cover pretty much everything. So today what we're going to be doing is Graceland Cemetery off the route. Now, if you're looking at tour companies for this October and want to see what our tours are like, this will be a pretty good sample, but we're going to be covering the bonus material today. These are kind of like the deleted scenes from a Graceland Cemetery tour. Usually it's stuff that's just a little bit too far away from where we would normally be walking, but other times it's just stuff that we tend to walk past. Anyway, we'll just make our way on inside here. Graceland Cemetery. Burials began in 1860, right in time for the Civil War. Now, if you look right over here to the left, This space was really supposed to be space for soldiers' graves, but the city decided to use Rose Hill for those purposes instead. So really there's just kind of one grave hidden in the background over there. But that one we do tend to cover a lot. But burials here began in 1860. There's now somewhere in the neighborhood of 175,000 people buried here, but exact numbers are very difficult to get. Various times in history they haven't been as good with research as they have with other times. The founder, Thomas Barber Bryan, wanted to use this space for soldiers, but when they decided to go with Rose Hill instead, he just had a guy named William Webb removed from the vault, buried in that space. So now there's just the one soldier for that whole space on a grave that you can't even read anymore. Now, graves that you can't even read anymore are fairly common. We're in Chicago here. Even before acid rain, a lot of these stones were not really built for Chicago winters. Well, over here, this is one that we pass most of the time on the tour. It's just a couple of layers back. This thing was probably hard to read even when it was first built. This one that looks kind of like an altar with a drape over it. The lettering is on the drape. Probably wasn't legible even when it was brand new, honestly. But this is the Dewolfe family plot. Frederick Dewolfe was an abolitionist here in Chicago. He started out in Alton. Now, Alton, Illinois, the abolitionist Elijah Lovejoy was running a printing press. And a meeting was held in Alton as to what should be done about Mr. Lovejoy and his press. He was stirring up a lot of trouble for the town. And eventually he was attacked. His printing press was destroyed. Elijah Lovejoy was killed. At the meeting, Mr. Dewolfe was the only person cautioning people that he had a right to print what he wanted to. He eventually moved to Chicago. Later on, people from Alton said if only we had listened to him, we wouldn't have this horribly embarrassing stain on our record. But they made their way to Chicago. But over on the left, this larger one that's impossible to read is actually a monument to 3 of his daughters who were killed in New York. They were going around New York on a steamship, and the steamship didn't crash, but there was some sort of an explosion, and a lot of people were scalded to death or suffocated to death by all of the steam. Now, strangely, there's no record of them actually having been moved from the Old City Cemetery, but the monument was moved from the Old City Cemetery. And we can see in the records he bought the plot right after the accident, had it moved shortly thereafter. But it was the 3 daughters who were mentioned here. Their names are probably on there. They may or may not be buried in the plot. Now, his son, William, went on to be killed in the Civil War himself. He was wounded in a battle not too far from Washington, D.C., and taken to the home of Isaac Newton Arnold, who was a congressman who's buried up at the other side of Graceland Cemetery, and he died in Congressman Arnold's house. Arnold would later go on to introduce the first bill that would have outlawed slavery outright in the United States. There's an interesting line in the Tribune's obituary for Dewolfe. It said, "Truly has the dart of the insatiable archer found a shining mark." They got really flowery with the obituaries early on in the war. Now, just around the corner from here, there's a guy who died late in the war who was just about as prominent, but the obituary just said all the usual ceremony was held and all the usual obsequies were said. By then, people had just kind of gotten jaded to the whole thing. But we'll move on a little bit. Move back to the beginning. This is one that I probably could have on the walking tours. If I were doing like a themed, like a literary one. I got the audio up there. But this one, I got to admit, this is a guy I just looked him up because I loved the name. Weldon Cobb. A member of the Lafayette Lodge, as you can see from the insignia there. That was like, one of those fraternal organizations that people were so into in those times. Weldon J. Cobb was a writer. He managed a couple of generally forgettable newspapers here in Chicago over the years, but what he's best remembered for now, to the extent that he's remembered at all, is he wrote what they called at the time boys' adventure stories for the Straightmeyer Syndicate. This is the early days of the Straightmeyer Syndicate that went on to do things like the Hardy Boys. These were highly formulaic books, published in a huge series. Cobb's most famous was probably one called Dave Dashaway. Here's Dave Dashaway and his hydroplane. Dave Dashaway, Air Champion. Now, these were airplane adventure books published in the 1910s before most of the readers had probably ever actually seen a flying machine. So you can kind of imagine what the appeal would have been. He wrote them under the name Roy Rockwood. Nobody in the Straightmeyer Syndicate was writing under their own name. There's been several different Franklin W. Dixons writing the Hardy Boys over the years. My editor at Random House was Carolyn Keene for a while, writing the Nancy Drew books in one of the many, many revivals. I also found among the various Weldon Cobb things that are out there is one called The Hidden Hand. in a series called The Protector of Finance, Tales of Rasilius Marvel, Guardian of Bank Treasure. This sounds like it could be interesting, but Guardian of Bank Treasure. It's kind of like that radio show, Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, America's fabulous freelance insurance investigator with the action-packed expense account. You almost want to listen just because it sounds like it would be so comically boring. But then they throw in a bunch of stuff about aliens and stuff. This is probably about like that. I haven't actually been through to read The Adventures of Rasilius Marvel yet, but you definitely recognize the style. Just reading a few lines, this is totally Straightmeyer Syndicate style. This might have been before he was writing for that syndicate. These are pretty old. There's a couple of relatively unknown authors here in Chicago, here in Graceland Cemetery, who were very well known in their day, but have kind of slipped off of the radar over the years, and in some cases really deserve to get rediscovered. I haven't tried to read all the Weldon Cobb stuff yet, but I bet there's some interesting stuff. This is the Wolfer family plot. The face is probably a 4-year-old of theirs who died. I believe she had typhoid fever. Not much else is known about them. But over here in this pile is this one book-shaped one. Well, it's a pillow with a book on top of it. And the signature on top of the book is absolutely illegible. You can try to sound it out all you want. There's a signature engraved on it. You really have to know what it says, and even then, you don't really know how she could have written like this. But the name on it is Florence McLandberg. Now, when Florence McLandberg was just a teenager here in Chicago, she wrote a book called The Automaton Ear and Other Sketches. Now, the Automaton Ear is considered a really early example of what is now known as science fiction. Specifically, it's a genre of sci-fi called the time viewer, somebody who invents something that allows them to see through time. Or in her case, the guy invents something that allows him to hear through time. And eventually, of course, is driven to madness. It's sci-fi, but the writing, you can see she's wearing her influence of Edgar Allan Poe absolutely on her sleeve at the time. And this was a very well-reviewed collection of stories when it came out, but she was suffering from really ill health and didn't write again for several decades. When she was much older, she wrote a lot of patriotic poetry during World War I. Then after that, she wrote mostly letters to the editor, which were a little bit less patriotic after the war. She would say things like, well, nobody really won the war. Everybody lost. And if we don't tear down all of the weapons, we're going to lose again. She would also write some things about ripping on organized religion. One guy wrote into the paper after one of her letters saying, I always enjoy Florence McLandberg's letters, but I imagine she's a young person, a product of this modern education system, and has not yet realized the softening influence of religion. Somebody else wrote in and said, this product of modern education is in her 80s, right? You can find quite a bit of her stuff online, both under her own name, and there was another one, like McLandberg. She used McLandberg as the first name. Now, also, you can see down at the bottom here, the publisher, Jansen McClurg & Co. McClurg is buried just on the opposite side of the cemetery. We've covered him on several different tours. But of course, it is not all good guys at Graceland Cemetery. As I said, we've got 175,000 some odd people, somewhere over that, buried in the cemetery. Naturally, not all of them are going to be good. In fact, it's 19th century. Very few people would have had beliefs that hold up to our standards today, but then there are certain people who just took it too far. I'll cut a lot of people historical slack. This guy, not so much. Now, in 1840, Chicago had 3 police officers, and one of them was Henry Rhines. He was the man who made the arrest of the first guy convicted of murder in Chicago, John Stone, 1840. But throughout the 1840s and into the 1850s, he was primarily known as Chicago's biggest slave catcher. He was constantly arresting people that he thought might be escaping enslaved people. As far away as New York, he was referred to in the press as a degraded, drunken wretch. Then one day, while he was getting towards a drunken state in a bar, he got into an argument with the bartender and shot him. When the bartender died in the hospital after a few agonizing weeks, Rhines was arrested for murder, broke out of prison, escaped to New Orleans where he was caught again, then brought back to Chicago where apparently the whole thing blew over because 2 years later he was back to his old slave-catching ways. He died well before the cemetery opened in 1852. He would have been moved here from the Old City Cemetery along with his father Henry W., born 1782, and his son, Henry, who was better known as Dump Rhines, a famous billiard player. there's a trick shot named after Dump Rhines. But, well, you know what I do when I come to a grave of somebody like this, who's best known as like a slave catcher or something? I would run out of dance moves by the time I got to him, so I just kind of did the hand jive. Born to hand jive, baby, you degraded drunken wretch. All right, move over to the other side. This one we could almost work onto a walking tour. It's just a little ways off of the route. I know I've used it a couple of times. But this is a particularly sad monument sculpted by Nellie Verne Walker, who was a protege of Laredo Taft, who did the famous Eternal Silence statue here in Chicago, also the Crusader, the Knight. But it was built for the Fraley and Watson families, who had a particularly rough day. The Watsons had a son and a grandson die on the same day of different diseases in their house. And they must have known it was coming because they had just bought the plot recently. Not too much more I can say other than Mary Fraley Watson eventually hired Nellie Verne Walker. She probably knew her through her membership in arts clubs. But back behind them in this general vicinity, there are a couple of other interesting stories. One is a grave that we're working on getting marked for a guy named William Randle, who was one of the older members of the United States Colored Troops. After the Emancipation Proclamation went through, there was just a little bit of controversy before they started recruiting black men to be soldiers. One of the ones who signed up was William Randle. He was a little bit older than most of them. He was already not in the best of health, so he mostly ended up working as a cook, which of course was important work, but being a cook didn't exempt you from having to go off on long marches. And in the course of the marches, he fell into the river at one point. He was nearly starved to death at Petersburg during the siege of Petersburg. And by the time he got back from the army, he was in really bad shape. He was known to say, "I believe that this war has completely used me up." He was only able to work off and on. Luckily, his wife was a nurse, so she was able to take care of him somewhat, but she still had to enlist the help of a lot of his friends. He was too proud to ask for a pension, but he could have gotten one. Now, also in the same general vicinity, there's a kid by the name of Young Waffles. That's what they called him anyway. But Young Waffles was, his real name was Ole. He was a newsie. Now, newsies were a really interesting sort of society in Chicago. We'll move down over to here. There's several different newsie-related plots. The newsies, of course, were the kids who sold the newspapers. Many of these kids were homeless. Many of them were orphans and largely living self-sufficiently by making 50 cents or $1 a day selling newspapers. And possibly some more from gambling. They were all constantly gambling on stuff. But Waffles had his name, almost all of them had nicknames, and most of the nicknames were horribly offensive. Ole's older brother had been known as Waffles because of the smallpox scars. He had smallpox as a young man, had scars all over his face, and when he eventually died, his brother took over as a newspaper guy, and they just gave him the nickname Young Waffles because he was Waffles' younger brother. He didn't object. Nobody objected to their horribly offensive nicknames. I mean, these were unsupervised children. So he eventually outgrew working as a newsie, but he kept on hanging around in Newsie's Alley, like helping kids try to stay away from gambling, taking the kids off on fishing trips. But this would prove to be fatal. One day he took the kids off to a fishing cabin that he had way out in the wave break someplace, so somewhere in the middle of the lake. A horrible storm came up. He was able to get the two kids who were with him tied to the support beams of the cabin that he was in so that they wouldn't get washed away with the waves, but he was washed away with the waves himself. In a rather improbable twist in the story, they said that when his body washed ashore, there was a deed to the plot in Graceland Cemetery, where several of his family members had already been buried over the years. It's kind of an implausible aspect of the story, but he was buried up kind of behind that statue. This right here, for the Dewey marker, George Dewey, was a police officer who was known as the liaison to the Newsies community. In a lot of cases, it was probably as close as these kids came to having a father. And he would do things like buying shoes for the kids or getting them into school so they could learn how to read. Now imagine this, a lot of these kids were going around selling newspapers and didn't really know what the headline said unless somebody told them. Many of them grew up to be great kids and grew up to have illustrious careers, like Hinky Dink Kenna got started as a newsie. A lot of them were what they called newspaper sluggers, which was like the farm team for the Chicago mob in the 1920s. Others became respectable businessmen. Now, what we've got next to him, next to Dewey to the left, is a largely unmarked plot featuring an unmarked grave for Sarah Goode. Now, Sarah is occasionally advertised as the first black woman to get a U.S. patent. Now, when they first wrote articles about her, they were kind of jumping the gun. A couple of black women who got patents earlier than she did have been identified since then. But she was probably the first black woman in Chicago to get a patent in any case. She had a patent for a folding bed. It was a bed that folded into a desk. You occasionally hear that she invented the Murphy bed or a precursor to a Murphy bed. That's kind of exaggerating things. There's a tendency to exaggerate stories about her. Really, this is one of several folding beds that were on the market, but she did get a patent for it. And the fact that other black women had gotten patents too doesn't mean that it doesn't diminish her accomplishment at all. What fascinates me the most is going through her paperwork. And she's got quite a lot of paperwork on file. She and her husband eventually started a furniture store. And the furniture store was in the basement of a medical school. That medical school, the pipes flooded. Wrecked all of their furniture, pretty much drove them out of business. Because of this, though, there's a lot of paperwork on file. They had a lot of money borrowed that they weren't able to pay back because of that flood. What's really fascinating about it is she was able to get loans from places like Marshall Field. Marshall Field did more wholesaling than anything else in those days. She was able to get credit on her own without her husband co-signing. You occasionally hear that that was illegal in those days. It wasn't illegal, but it was fairly uncommon. A lot of banks and a lot of lenders would have refused to give money to a woman without her husband co-signing, in particular a black woman. The fact that she was able to get credit as much as she was is really a unique and impressive feat just in and of itself. Now, there's a lot of misinformation about her going around. There's a lot of one-pager articles. Usually they include a picture that's not really her. They include information that's completely wrong. It's one of the reasons I was glad to be doing the Graceland Cemetery book. There's still, I think, a lot to find out about Sarah Goode, but I was able to at least nail down quite a bit of the important stuff. Like, we know where her furniture store was now. That helps. We'll move on a little bit here. And go up the road a bit. This is a columbarium next to the chapel. Some interesting people here. There's Marion Mahoney Griffin, the most prominent woman architect of the many architects buried at Graceland. And really on my walking tours, I tend not to feature architects too much. Because I feel like if people aren't familiar with their work, it won't be that meaningful to see their markers. On virtual tours, I can show some of the work, which helps a bit. We'll make our way up through here. We actually went to this one on a walking tour not too long ago. We had to do a little bit of off-roading to get to it. But it was the True Crime edition. This is kind of a tie-in to that. Not necessarily true crime. But it is one of my very favorite graves in the cemetery. This is Vincent Starrett. Vincent Starrett was the Chicago Tribune's book critic for many years, but perhaps better known as an expert on Sherlock Holmes. And what we've got here on the on his gravestone is a copy of one of his books with a couple of his personal book plates, and one of his famous quotes about the nostalgia of reading Sherlock Holmes. Here, though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895. Carl Sandburg said Vincent Starrett was a man who could have been born and lived in any generation. He was a mystery writer for a while by himself, so yet another mystery writer to feature on the tour today. And then in the 1930s, he was featured in an anthology of Chicago murder stories. That's him over on the left. One of several people writing about a series of Chicago murders over the years. Next to him in the hat is Lillian Colley, then known as Nelly's Child. Lillian Colley I talk about quite a bit. Back in the 20s when she was just a teenager, she ran a bohemian tea room called the Wind Blew Inn. It was one of the first queer hangouts in Chicago that's been documented. The cops used to raid the place all the time because of rumors that she was hosting petting parties. And she and her partner had to tell the judge, "Your Honor, we solemnly swear there is no snuggle pupping at the Wind Blew Inn." She disappeared off of the record not long after that. It took me forever to figure out whatever became of her. But it turned out that she started writing mystery novels and hanging out with Vincent Starrett here at Marshall Fields doing a book signing. She had a play that was on Broadway for about a week. several mystery novels, a couple of more serious novels. But she's not at Graceland, so I shouldn't worry too much about her for right now. But the Vincent Starrett one, I love this because I feel like you know a lot about Vincent based on his tombstone. And that's something you don't really get very often. So often, all you really learn about somebody on their tombstone is like father, brother, or sometimes their army unit. A while ago, I found a gravestone with a big medallion saying descendant of Mayflower passengers. Like, that's all you've got to say about your life is who you were related to. Distantly related to by then, too. So I love it when there are epitaphs that tell us a bit about what the person was like, or what they were into, what kind of people they were. Here we'll pass the Chalmers Monument. Superintendent Chalmers. Oh, hey, Priya, what are you playing with? That's not a toy. Okay. Well, first we will pass this guy whose epitaph says he was Secretary of the Treasury of the United States under President Taft, Franklin McVeach. But I'm going to get distracted because right behind him, there's a woman with a Smashing Pumpkins lyric on her gravestone. Lillian Julia Davenport Partak. Lily, my one and only. Watch Billy Corgan sue me for that. He would, you know. Lillian was a typist who died of breast cancer, a graphic designer who died of breast cancer. In her final tweet, she said, "All I learned about typography, I learned from watching The Price is Right." Now, when it comes down to who am I going to feature more prominently in the book, the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States or the person who puts a Smashing Pumpkins lyric on their gravestone? That's going to be the Smashing Pumpkins lyric. But I love epitaphs like that. I love stories like that. If he was secretary under Taft, he was probably a good secretary. I'll give him that. I probably would have voted Roosevelt over Taft in 1912, but Taft is kind of underrated, I think. This one we saw just this morning. I cannot find a thing about Joseph Schuler, but I love his gravestone. I love that he's got a mullet on his gravestone, and I love his quote. Ha! Was that it? I love this sort of thing. We may not know anything about the guy, but we kind of know what he was like. At least what he looked like, anyway. Then over around here, we've got the larger marker of William Heegard, a cigar maker. He probably initially bought this whole place, and then his family sold it back to the cemetery for use as individual graves, including this one for a guy who's not actually dead yet, Joseph Jude McCaskey. I love this one. Smiley face, peace sign, and the epitaph, he was tidy. Love yourself. And, you know, he was only like 8 years old when it was the time of the flower power. Sunrise, 1961, sunset, not yet. Joseph Jude McCaskey is of the family that owns the Chicago Bears. His mother is the woman who officially owns the team. He seems to be kind of quiet and keeps to himself. There's not a lot of publicly known stuff about Joseph Jude. Then right up over here, David Silbar. Rock on. David Silbar, I could find a little bit about him. According to his obituary, when he died in 1998, he had suffered a nervous breakdown as a young man and was diagnosed as schizophrenic, though it says in the obituary this was a disease he never accepted, never admitted to having. But anyway, rock on, David. We'll move just back from him a little ways. We'll get back to some history here. Back behind Mr. Heegard is a very modest grave for a very prominent man. Dr. Daniel Hale Williams was perhaps the most prominent black surgeon of his generation. He was one of the founders and one of the workers at Providence Hospital who was particularly famous because one day a guy came in named James Cornish who had been stabbed with what newspapers described as a sailor's knife. The knife had gone through his chest. Upon operating, Dr. Williams found that it had actually penetrated the pericardium, the sac that surrounds the heart. Now, normally, this means this guy was dead. But Dr. Williams decided to perform open heart surgery and try to stitch it back up. And when it was successful, this made the news. That as far as anybody knew at the time, nobody had ever performed successful open heart surgery like this. This is another one where there's some dispute about whether it was really the first, but that frankly doesn't diminish the accomplishment one bit. Dr. Daniel Hale Williams made history that day. I did a Mysteries at the Museum episode about him. They wanted me to go really play up the drama, like Dr. Williams knew that it was a huge risk. But frankly, it wasn't a huge risk. This guy was dead. There was very few doctors would have looked at him and thought that it was a risk to do anything on him because he was dead as he lay there. Dr. Williams decided to take a chance anyway and try to do what he could, and as a result, you can see it right here, sewed up his heart. He has a building named after him now. It's really kind of a remarkably modest grave. It wasn't like he was dirt poor or anything. We'll move on a bit. And that one doesn't always come up on the tours, partly just because it's kind of hard to get everybody up there. And we'll move on. This is one of the more famous ones at Graceland that I don't feature much. But this is William Hurlbut, the founder of the National League, and author of a baseball rule book that was unchanged for generations. At the time that he wrote it, he officially would say, listen, nobody could make a rule book about baseball that is going to stand for more than a month. Rules in those days were constantly changing, like how far the way the bases should be, what the rules were, what the infield fly rule was. There were tons and tons of different rules that were changing constantly, but he wrote one that made it a respectable game, kept the gamblers out as well. Now, Mr. Spalding of Spalding Sporting Goods credited him with coining one of the greatest Chicago quotes, "I would rather be a lamppost in Chicago than a millionaire in any other city." Now, he has about as good a claim to it as anybody else. I looked it up as well as I could. There were variations on that quote going around for years, but as early as we can come is Mr. Spalding saying it was a William Hurlbut original. Mr. Spalding is generally not a reliable source. He's also the source of the idea that Abner Doubleday invented baseball. I've read Abner Doubleday's books about his experiences serving at Fort Sumter. If he had any claim whatsoever about baseball, he would have never shut up about it. It's widely regarded as a myth. Mr. Spalding just badly wanted baseball to be a uniquely American invention, not based on the English game of rounders. But he was a good buddy of William Hurlbut. As founder of the National League, he ran the place with an iron fist. He suspended players right and left for insubordination, which probably either meant drunkenness or gambling. In fact, in one of the vaults here in Graceland, one of the players that he suspended for a while now lies in repose. Now here's something. Right after I logged off this morning, I spotted a coyote. You can see it running off in the distance there. We'll kind of follow the coyote like we're following the weird naked Indian in the Doors movie. Or, Wayne's World 2. See, there it goes. This was a grave I wasn't planning on featuring tonight, but the coyote led me there. What can I say? Now I've kind of lost... Oh, there he is. I kind of lost track of where he was at a certain point, but I also knew that I was in a space... I can always kind of triangulate based on this other grave that's pointing at this one. But one of the more puzzling things in the cemetery, right back over here, is John Ware, born in Scotland 1852, lost at sea April 14th, 1912, SS Titanic. Now, John Ware was a Scotsman himself and remained a Scotsman. The night before he was due to sail off on the Titanic, he was overheard in the hotel saying something to the effect of, "I wish I could sell back my ticket. I'm afraid that ship is going to sink. I have a premonition about it." This was reported only a couple of days after the ship did sink. It would have been a lot more impressive if it was reported before the ship sank, but there's a very narrow window of time, and really, if you're going to mention that the ship is going to sink, the odds that somebody's going to write that down within 2 days, really very slim. There's any number of stories like that, of course. Almost any time there's a shipwreck, there are people who say that they just knew it was going to sink. Also, pretty much every time a ship doesn't sink, there are probably also people who say that they have that premonition. But this is a bit of a puzzler because he is over here with the Graham family. I can find absolutely no connection between him and the Graham family, why they decided to put a cenotaph to him, a marker. His body was not recovered, he's not buried here. But why they put a marker here for him, I really genuinely have no idea. It's just one of those mysteries. But this is Mysterious Chicago, after all. It's one of 2 Titanic markers that I know of in Chicago. The other being this one, Arthur Ryerson, of the Ryerson family. There's also a marker to his sister, who is also not buried here. She is buried in Massachusetts, probably nearby the woman the woman who was her lifelong companion. Quite literally a Boston marriage. Arthur Ryerson was a nephew of the Ryerson family that was involved in Ryerson lumber. Big feature of high society in his day. But there was Arthur and his wives were vacationing in Europe when they found out that their son had died in an automobile accident, and one of those newfangled horseless carriages booked passage to come back home on the fastest ship they could, and that was the Titanic. Now, if you watch the Titanic movie, there's a point where they come up to DiCaprio and say, "Hey, whose coat are you wearing, really?" And it says on the inside, "A Ryerson." It is a Ryerson. There's also a scene of him in A Night to Remember, the earlier Titanic movie, where he's trying to get his son, who's 13 years old, onto one of the lifeboats, and the guard says, "No, he can't come on." And Arthur said, "Of course this boy can go with his mother. He's only 13. That's actually based on witness statements. That was something that Arthur Ryerson actually said. His wife, after all, had already lost one son. Just recently, they were on the way home for his funeral. And now he knew that he was going to lose her as well. But little bits of Chicago history hidden everywhere at Graceland Cemetery. Like right down over here, I'm not even sure I got this one, I learned about this one in time for the book, but this smaller obelisk up over here. That's kind of the problem with the book, is I could have kept working on it forever and ever and ever. I could have made it as long as a phone book, an old-fashioned phone book, remember those? They still pile up in my entryway, wrapped in plastic all the time. But this is the Clark family monument. Mr. Henry Clark was the guy who built the Clark House, which still stands down on Prairie Avenue. It's not at its original location. Originally, it was a couple of blocks north of this, but it is generally considered to be the oldest house in Chicago. Now, that's another one of those things where it kind of depends on who you ask. There's a slightly older house over in Norwood Park, but that wasn't Chicago at the time that it was built. It was an area that was absorbed in. By some metrics, this is the oldest house in Chicago. He was initially buried outside of it. He died in one of our really big cholera epidemics, and he was saying those people in City Cemetery, they're just dumping him in piles. They don't even know which body is which. So bury me on my property instead, okay? So that's what they did for several years. People would walk by. They started calling this house the Old Widow Clark's house, and right outside of it was Mr. Clark's grave. He was a hardware dealer, I believe. But eventually he was moved over to Graceland. And we've just passed him a little bit. I kind of call this the Richard Corey section. It's full of millionaire suicides. The obelisk on the left was a guy named Marcus who committed suicide, or died by suicide. They said it was after a bad health diagnosis, but in those days they always just believed there must be some cause. They just didn't know much about mental health. But this is William Findlay Coolbaugh, who was a banker in Chicago, by some metrics, the banker of Chicago. Also very active in politics, he accompanied Andrew Johnson, one of our worst presidents, on his famous Swing Around the Circle tour, which was a tour where he went around to shore up support for himself by making speeches, spent most of the time making a fool out of himself by attacking all of his enemies and calling people traitors. Right behind him is his daughter, Illinois Coolbaugh, who was just a kid when William died. William, one night, eventually turned against Andrew Johnson himself. When Johnson was being impeached, he personally went to D.C. to lobby his old friend Senator Grimes of Iowa to vote to convict Johnson and remove him from office. Had he been successful, Johnson would have been removed, but a single vote saved him. A few years later, Coolbaugh walked out to Senator Douglas's unfinished monument. One night it was a horrible storm. He dressed up in a three-piece suit with a vest, walked out to Douglas's monument, and shot himself to death. This was a huge scandal. Everybody was scrambling to find out, did he have a bad health diagnosis? Was he not as rich as it seemed? They were bugging his friend Marshall Field to tell him, you've got to have some dirt about this guy. But really, he didn't have much. It was just one of those things, But they didn't, there was one of the articles was called Insanity as a Fine Art. The Victorian ignorance of mental health is just on vigorous display in these things. And this is a picture of William. This is one of the reasons I didn't bother with too many pictures of the people in the book. Like this is George Pullman. This is William Coolbaugh. These are different guys. Like, how many pictures can I have in the book of people wearing the same outfit with the same facial hair and the same haircut? There's a lot of that going around. Behind him is his daughter, Illinois Coolbaugh, who was only a little kid when he died. She was very interested in science. She's got a number of sketches that were published, sketches and letters to the editor that were published in science magazines. This is a drawing she made of the frost on the window one time. She died in a sanatorium. I believe it was the one from that movie, The Road to Wellville. A sanatorium, we don't think like, when I think sanitarium, I still think Metallica, sanitarium, like an insane, what we would have once called an insane asylum. She went to the sanitariums that were the same root word as, like sanitized for your protection. Sanitary. But other details beyond that she died in her early 20s at one of those places, I really couldn't find too much. We'll move just back around them a little bit. Now, the bench, designed by the architectural firm of Jenny and Mundy, is for the Lyon and Conger family. Now, John Lyon worked at the Board of Trade as a trader. He was always trying to corner the market on wheat. He was known for his spectacularly daring trades. He would make and lose millions in the same week. They always said that there was no trade too dangerous for him, only trades that were too easy. And for the longest time, my impression of him was that the guy thought of nothing but business. His whole life was based around the Board of Trade. It was all that he ever thought about. But then I found some memoirs from his granddaughter, who was right in front here, Cornelia Conger. And Cornelia said that he was also very into philosophy and particularly an enemy of all forms of racial prejudice. 1893 came around, the World's Fair came to Chicago. They needed places to put the various dignitaries up, including at their house on Michigan Avenue, where they opened their doors to one of the guys who was going to be speaking at the Congress of World Religions, Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda was, over the course of the Congress of World Religions at the building that is now the Art Institute, he is generally credited with introducing the concept of yoga to the United States. And at the time, there were some people saying, you're going to have some guests from the South. You really shouldn't have the Swami staying with you. And Mrs. Lyon said, that young Indian is the most interesting man who has ever stayed in our house, and if they don't like it, they can go someplace else. Cornelia was only about 6 years old at the time, but she absolutely loved the Swami, told stories about him for the rest of her life, though she herself became internationally well known as an interior decorator herself. There's tons of columns from her in the Chicago Tribune. Up at the top, one guy I really wish I could throw in a little more often, even though it's an unmarked grave way off to the side, and it's actually his third grave in Chicago, is a guy by the name of Seth Payne. This is a newspaper that he put out when he was starting what was called a Wildcat Bank. It was an independent bank using his own currency. Then he put it out, it was money with his picture on it. But this was a bank run on spiritualist principles. He had hired mediums to talk to the ghost of Alexander Hamilton to see if somebody was a good candidate for a lawyer. This is also the newspaper that he put out, of which there are really only a few copies left in circulation. He was an interesting guy. One newspaper referred to him as a queer chicken. An obituary said that all of the isms stuck to him like burrs on sheep's wool. And his causes range from being way ahead of his time to being, kind of harmless. Spiritualism was not one that wears too well, but he was also into vegetarianism way before it was cool. He was into feminism way before it was cool. And also into abolitionism. He was majorly active on the Underground Railroad. Eventually, he started a women's home here in Chicago. That was where he died. There's a picture of him over on the left here. This is him serving in part of the Secret Service at Antietam during the Civil War. His main job was going back to D.C. and helping enslaved people who were being held in the jail there break out of the jail. Interesting guy. There's still an elementary school named after him out in Lake Zurich, but I imagine most of the kids have no idea who this guy was, which is a shame because he's a fascinating character. There is a person who is working on a biography of him, and this is a third grave at Graceland. When he died, it was major news. A lot of prominent Chicagoans attended the funeral. People who were buried nearby him with massive monuments were pallbearers. He was buried originally down in Section E and F, right in the middle of the cemetery, but in a plot that no one appears to have owned. When somebody bought that plot, they moved him a few plots over. And when somebody bought that one, they moved him up to this unmarked space over here. I'm trying to find some more solid record of his military service. He was officially working for Pinkerton at the time, not necessarily officially for the military. But if we can find some military connection, we might be able to get them to provide a gravestone for him. Because after all, plenty of people less deserving have gravestones. Like up here along the wall, the Pirate King of Chicago. Up here along the rubble wall in the northeast corner of the cemetery is Captain George Wellington Streeter. His version of the story is he crashed his houseboat onto the shore and started charging people to dump their garbage around his boat, creating the landfill that is now known as Streeterville. Really, the city was filling it in anyway. He just did a lot of forgery, a lot of scams, a lot of squatting. But even though the guy was an absolute villain and a pirate, the Chicagoans kind of had a soft spot for him just because they had to admire his tenacity. At one point, after everything had been filled in, they tried to evict him from living on the land, but at the time there weren't a lot of restrictions on parking. So he just put his house onto an automobile and may have invented the automobile motorhome and just parked it. There wasn't really any restriction on parking at the time, so there wasn't much they could do, and his funeral was a pretty major affair. Buried with his plug hat. And, if he has a gravestone, obviously I really think that Mr. Payne ought to as well. But over in this same section up over here, there's one guy who doesn't have a gravestone. That's probably better. Well, there's one line that I brought up on the new podcast, Only Minis in the Building. There's a line in Dickens that pickpocketing one's apprenticeship, but murder anybody is up to. It's not really that complicated. It might be hard to get away with, but the actual act of killing somebody, just take heavy object, apply brute force. Out here, there is an unmarked grave to William Drossel, who accidentally killed himself while he was trying to murder his wife. Oops. Apparently, he had tried to murder his wife several times, but was not the kind of guy who succeeded at very much. So his idea was that he was going to shoot her and then himself, so he shot at her, then shot himself, without bothering to see if he had actually shot her properly. In the margin of a newspaper, he had written, "I wish to be buried at Graceland Cemetery." I was honestly stunned that they actually did bury him here. But in what may be not a surprise, as near as I could find, he doesn't have a gravestone. That's one I'm not working on fixing. Alright, this takes me a little bit over my usual time. Let's do one more anyway. We'll end with somebody prominent with some nice inspiring quotes here. Just across the way from Mr. Drossel, just on the other side of this would be the pond, is Governor John Altgeld. He's got a statue we might be seeing on the mini tours one of these days soon. John Altgeld is probably best known for pardoning the Haymarket anarchists. This was a thing, in case you were kind of new to these tours. In the 1880s, there was a rally for the 8-hour workday after a couple of striking workers had been killed by Pinkerton agents, who were initially known for their work on the Underground Railroad, then shifted to be working against organized labor. Things evolve, things change. But during the rally, the cops started marching towards it, pointing guns at everybody. The second the permit expired, a bomb went off. They never really figured out who threw the bomb. They just arrested all the people who had spoken at the rally, and a couple of people who weren't even there, and eventually had them all sentenced to be executed. And 4 of them were executed. One of them died by suicide the night before the execution. Governor Altgeld was kind of a confusing character at the time. He was a progressive Democrat at the time when you didn't really see a lot of progressive Democrats. He puzzled members of both parties by claiming that the rich were getting rich and the poor were getting poorer, and knew that he was sealing his own doom by pardoning the remaining anarchists, but also knew that it was the right thing to do. As he says here, they put a few of his quotes on his gravestone. "If the defendants had had a fair trial, there ought to be no interference, for no punishment under our law could be too severe. But they did not have a fair trial. The evidence utterly fails to connect the unknown who threw the bomb with the defendants, and I am convinced it is my duty to act." Some other good lines over here. The doctrine might makes right has covered the earth with misery. While it crushes the weak, it also destroys the strong. Every deception, every cruelty, every wrong reaches back sooner or later and crushes its author. Justice is moral health, bringing happiness. Wrong is moral disease, bringing moral death. I do like the idea of vengeance upon the wicked. What can I say? But all right, everybody. So let me quick plug some of the upcoming events. The next in-person one is going to be at Mystericon, October 1st through 3rd. There are still tickets available for the 9:30 p.m. boat tour. Just a handful of tickets left. The 8 p.m. is all sold out. 9:30 still has a handful to go. Then Sundays in October, we'll be doing Graceland Cemetery tours like this one in person. There's also plenty more going on in October. All of the October tickets are available at MysteriousChicago.com. Among virtual tours, Sunday morning, I'll be out with my camera to do a virtual continuation of our Riverwalk tour from a couple of weeks ago. We're going to hit the South Branch. We're going to go inside some of the buildings. We'll see how far we can get into the Chicago Daily News building, into Union Station, some of the buildings like that. Some of the modernist ones we can probably skip. Then next Thursday, a week from today, we will be doing Rose Hill Cemetery off the route. A couple of Rose Hill tours coming up in October as well. And of course, tomorrow night at 6:30 on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, it's Whiskey and a Cookie, in which Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. Now, should you still need a Mysterious Chicago t-shirt, sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., etc., just go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago, like these fine Georgia voters right over here. They will hook you up with all kinds of Mysterious Chicago products, including shirts featuring Mystericon. Coming up again, we're just over a week away from this. Do you believe this? Next week when I do the Rose Hill virtual tour, it'll be like Mystericon tomorrow night. Wow. So lots of great stuff coming up here on Mysterious Chicago, as always. So with that, everybody, I will put this sign on up and put the Benny Goodman back on, and we'll just hang out like we always do. Thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I can make this a little smaller, too. You can see more of the... See a little bit more of the leaves. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Ann. Oh, Audrey, glad to have you. Yeah, bring warm clothing. It gets chilly on the boats. Good night, Alex. I hope I'll be able to do Find a Grave Friday tomorrow. It's going to be a little bit tricky because I have another book coming out called Murder Maps USA. And I got a meeting with the publicist who is in Ireland. This is a UK publisher. Hey, Dina. Sorry to hear that, Gene. That sucks. Bob, no, I won't have anything in stock. I don't get that much of a discount on these things. Glad to have you back, Deanna. And yeah, you know, a couple of these fine Georgia voters are going to be present for Mystericon as well for part of it. We should be seeing them on Find a Grave Friday next week, as well as the Graceland tour that on Saturday morning next weekend, and probably both of the boat tours. Are there ghost stories in Graceland Cemetery? A couple, but not very many. You know, every ghost story has a couple of them. There's not one as famous as Resurrection Mary, certainly. Thanks, Paula. Thank you, Cindy. Audrey, that's good to hear. Bachelor's Grove is something else altogether. Bachelor's Grove is almost entirely ghost stories. Many of which start with, we were out there one night and we were super high. Nice, J. Bro. Is Graceland the largest of Chicago cemeteries? No, not even close. Rose Hill is quite a bit bigger. Mary Miles is down with a cold right now, so I'm not sure if he'll be making an appearance. Priya, though, is presently sitting on this pillow. Debbie, it depends on your wheelchair. We do go a little bit off-road. It's kind of a year mileage may vary situation. We stick largely to the paved paths, but we do veer off the road a little bit. If your wheelchair can handle that, by all means, come on out. I've had plenty of people with wheelchairs before. Thank you, Eleanor. Priya? Priya, kid. People want to see you. We don't really oblige them. Here's our little bitty Priya. This is the stillest Priya's ever been. She's still little and very squirmy. Thanks, Kim.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now,
She's still just a ball of energy being 5 months old. Oh, I just totally knocked down my drink. Well, Priya did. But I deserved it. It's okay, it was about empty anyway. But yeah, she's kind of figured out at this point that she's got it made here. You know, there's a million toys to play with, a million places to sit, a great big brother. Even though he doesn't want to play the last couple of days since he's had a cold. Plenty of people to pet her. Good night, Norris. Oh, Aiden's doing great in his classes. She's a lovely cat. You can see her here. You want to play a little Priya? She's still a little sleepy. Prime playtime for her is about 5 in the morning. There you go. You can also see off to the side here a little bit. This is, oh, here, I gotta move it, I guess. This is the cat's, that's the cat's Suka. It's Sukkot, after all. It's kind of a tell me your reform without telling me your reform. I don't have a Suka outdoors, but I do have one for the cats.
down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. Now here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it. Trucking.
Now, thank you for the good thoughts to Miles. Well, the 3 a.m. wake up still happens sometimes, too. There you go, Priya. Debbie, cold, it's not necessarily the right term, but it's basically a cold. He's got a vet appointment on Monday. But vets are kind of, it's hard to work in appointments these days. All the time. Oh. Good girl. What a good girl you are. Alright, you just chase that. She's a great cat. Yeah, respiratory infection is probably a better term. But we're going to try to get him some medicine and stuff. Right now, it's just a matter of keeping him hydrated and comfortable. It's also just a matter of just the stress of now there's a new person living in the house, there's a new kitten in the house, he has to share his toys, he's not wild about that part. But she sits with him a lot. They cuddle, they lick each other's heads, they get along great. Now Miles doesn't like chicken just in general, he's a weirdly picky eater for a cat. Oh, he's now carrying that toy that she was just chasing. She's a sweetie.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Now, I don't have my own Suka, but there's the coffee shop at Howard in California has a community one. Oh yeah, we're making sure we take him to the vet as soon as we got the earliest appointment we could. How's my field research doing? Right now I don't have too much to research other than morning mini tours. And stuff for the Patreon. I don't have a book project right now, it's a weird situation for me. Cindy, a Sukkah is a hut that you build during the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. It's a booth, really. I could just do a mini tour walking around Westridge, a tour of people's sukkahs that they put up. We've got some elaborate ones out here. Yeah, Eli and I were pitching some. We haven't really gotten. We were thinking about doing a time travel pub crawl book. We haven't able to get a good. We haven't really come up with a good way to do it. And Eli's pretty busy with work. He's starting a new job in a couple of days. The Murder Maps book. There was a series in the UK called Murder Maps about different murders around the UK. They wanted to do a US version of the book about murders in all 50 states between 1860 and 1939. And I'm the guy who got hired to write the text. And that's coming out. I honestly forget the message, but you've heard me talk about the band Stiffs Incorporated that I ran a webpage for back in the 90s, who were, we didn't have the term steampunk at the time, but that's basically what they were. They wrote songs about Jack the Ripper and wore top hats on stage. I got a message from the guitarist today, just sending me a picture of the cover saying, "Hey, this you?" It's a very gruesome book. There's a lot more gruesome crime scene pictures than I would normally have picked, honestly. But it is called Murder Maps, so you don't really read it expecting something tame, I don't suppose. No, I wasn't in charge of the pictures, I just did the text.
And stand some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
I kind of forget about that one. I've also got the Graceland book coming out, and honestly, the Graceland book was a really long effort. And this is all like 300 words, 50 words, 100 articles or so total. I imagine you probably can pre-order it. I haven't really looked it up yet. I just found out you could pre-order the Graceland book myself. Nobody told me these things. Priya, what are you chasing now? I hear you, but I don't see you. It's coming out shortly. or within the next couple of months sometimes. I know that I'm booked to do an interview on Irish TV in February. And tomorrow morning I have a chat with some people in Ireland over it. Octavia, no, I haven't gotten around to watching Visions yet, but I will. Did you see there's another new He-Man series out too? This one's more for kids. It's just a total reimagining the whole He-Man mythos. It works pretty well, though. Works as well as the original one does. There's an interesting question of whether you can really make a good He-Man show. The Rush Professional Building. I don't know where that is offhand. Have I ever brought a ghost home from the cemetery? No, not to my knowledge. I would get people occasionally on my ghost tours who would like email me the next day saying something followed them back from Hull House. It was almost always from Hull House. But honestly, many of the people, I would talk to them for a minute and get the distinct impression that they probably went to the grocery store and thought the guy from Lucky Charms followed them home too. I've only seen a couple episodes of the new He-Man, but it looks pretty fun.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Any good one?
And if you're going to reimagine it, I got no problem with that. It's a mess of a show to begin with. Yes, the bats on the back wall are at October levels now. Priya, what are you doing? Oh, that silly girl. For now, she still fits under both of the couches. That won't be for much longer. 1123 murder maps. Thank you, Terry. I suppose I could have Googled that, but I really avoid Googling my own books. It's just kind of a phobia. Like, Goodreads is blocked on my computer. I have a porn blocker that only blocks Goodreads. The sport of Danish kings is what would you do for $1, Jenny? Well, that and I don't know, there's something I put in the book, Play Me Backwards, that was the sport of Danish kings. It was a total shout out to the Adventures of Pete and Pete, where they referred to the game What Would You Do for $1 as the sport of Danish kings. If that is the sport of kings, then surely bowling is also a good sport. It's become my tradition as after this, I cool out for a while until 11 o'clock when the new Release Radar playlist on Spotify comes out. Last week's was awesome. New Dylan, new Ezra Furman, a new take on Get Back. Megan, exactly. Neither the good nor the bad reviews. Well, really, it's the unintelligent reviews that kill you. And I wrote young adult novels during the paranormal romance epidemic. The things I was getting dinged for. Now, Layla's tour isn't much more than mine in terms of distance. But yeah, definitely book Layla's tours, too, for Mystericon. And Patty's, too. Patty Swanson from Chicago for Chicago, and she's a bit quieter on effing Chicago. She's got a real job.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
Next week's Patreon post will be about a murder in the Palmer House. Of course, it's a murder in the old version of the Palmer House, but still. I used to get a lot of queries about whether the Palmer House was haunted. It's one of the things I bet the security guards have stories, but they're not allowed to talk about it. It's definitely not the image they want of the Palmer House. I don't think they've ever gotten in that dire financial straits, even when there were rumors that they were closing last year. Thanks, Bruce.
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress.
Let me rewind the Benny a little. Back to, let's say here. It is 150. Well, it's 100. Well, the current building dates to the 1920s. Thanks, Dory. Good night, Vicky. Good night, Vicky. Kind of like having it angled this way. You can see more of my stuff. You can't see the Tiffany lamp as well, the fake Tiffany lamp. Or Ram Man and Max Rebo. But I like seeing the cars go by there. I should really put this back up. Almost October, and it finally started feeling like autumn yesterday. I was in heaven walking around. Good night, Kristen. Priya's out and about. What did you find, Priya? That's a dangly toy. That requires a person to help. We'll play in a minute, okay? I should really be drinking out of my Graceland flask anyway. Oh, and you know what? Tomorrow might be, if we do find a Great Friday tomorrow, it'll be the last tour filmed on this phone. There, I'll put the pop socket up there. As this is the one I've been using the entire time that we've been working, that we've been running these. But I've already got the case for my new one that's coming in. Check this out. You can make custom pop sockets, it turns out. Yep, new phone coming, in theory, tomorrow. Priya, what are you up to, baby? Now, today after the tour, I drove around trying to find somebody who would screen print the Mysterious Chicago logo onto the little messenger bag that I use on tours. Nobody screen prints onto outside garments these days. So pop sockets are these things that go on phone cases that pop outwards like so to make it easier to grip now that phones are larger than they used to be. Laura, no, they don't have pop sockets on Cafe Press. I just went to popsockets.com. Kathy, I'm glad you're loving the Minis podcast. That'll probably be a 6-episode series. Priya. Thanks, Gene. I'm like two-fisting it over here. I got a very old Barton in the flask. Heaven's Door in here. But yeah, we haven't upgraded our phones in a few years.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Rose, yeah, that's kind of awkward. Ooh, a Beatles pop saga, that'd be cool too. You see, the one I've been using all this time is Baby Yoda. Grogu. But I got my new case that I at least hope fits, ready to go. Debbie, you know, I don't really have a problem with people using the logo to make their own gear. As long as they're not making like tons and tons of it and it's not something I automatically have on sale anyway. Gregory, the rye is my favorite. This one is one that I really splurged on a bit. This one, I'm drinking the Redbreast, which is one of their special editions. Not one of the like $800 special editions or anything. But, you know, I'll buy pretty much anything Bob Dylan puts out. You know me. This week has been endless fun taking the new bootleg series and making, like, alternate reality versions of his 80s albums. I'm more apt to listen to 80s Dylan than 60s Dylan most of the time, honestly. Amy, the name of the podcast, let's put that podcast button up here, is... Eek. Only Minis in the Building, a true crime podcast about people named Minnie. So there's a show on Hulu called Only Murders in the Building. Every episode I'm just hugging myself because I'm enjoying it so much. Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez starting a true crime podcast in a building that is clearly based on the Ansonia in New York City. Martin Short is stealing the show, but it's a good cozy mystery, just the kind of stuff that I love the most. But I was thinking about how many people named Minnie that I have in true crime stories, including 2 different Minnie Williamses from the same period. So it's a 6-episode series called Only Minis in the Building. Keely, I'm not sure if Murder Maps is on Amazon yet. Thanks, Megan. Somebody ought to pay me for doing these things. I just used them for promo. Yeah, in a trio of Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Selena Gomez, you got to admire Selena Gomez just for standing up and showing up and not just sitting there shivering the whole time. That's got to be intimidating, but she is holding her own. Steve Martin's doing great, but it's partly the writing and the character, but Martin Short is kind of stealing the show. Hardback only. Oh, that's rough.
And here's a short encore.
Sorry about that. I have absolutely nothing to do with, like, hardback or the pricing or anything. You know, by the time Minnie Mouse was around, the name Minnie was almost extinct as a first name. And after Minnie Mouse, it was almost totally extinct as a first name. But in 1880, the first year we have data for things like this, it was the 5th most common name. But I would say possibly more than that, because Minnie was also used as a diminutive for pretty much any name that started with an M.
Presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
NBC. I'm having a good time. This is when I'm back. I'm in a good mood. What can I say? I updated the theme on MysteriousChicago.com. It's a slightly different look now. And I think it looks a lot better than it did before. It's still not perfect. It's not exactly what I want, but it's pretty close. And Nathan Lane is great on the show, too. Sting is very funny on the show. I had a great Aunt Minnie. This is news to me, but... Kathleen, yeah. Yeah, Kathleen, you can use those Patreon tickets for any walking tour. And I think there's a $20 level tier available right now. A couple of slots available. Kim, hardly ever. I kind of tend to be a smart aleck about everything, so I stop. I kind of stop around 1940, and even then, I don't go up past the 20s too often. Aunt Minnie was married to Uncle Skinny. I feel like I should have known this. That's the Michigan side, right? I've had the side that I've had to unfollow over the course of the pandemic because spreading misinformation is unforgivable. I don't really know the Michigan side of the family that well, my dad's side. We're always finding out like new weird twists in the saga of the Michigan relatives. Now, we all have those relatives. I've been fairly fortunate. Most of the people that I've unfollowed or blocked are people that I met maybe once or twice, and probably in the 80s. Can you walk from Union Station to the Palmer House? Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad hike. I wouldn't want to carry something really heavy, that kind of a distance. But, you know, suitcase, fine. I carried suitcases much further than that. But no, that wouldn't be too bad of a hike. I mean, your mileage may vary, but...
Stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
All right. Well, all right, everybody. Seems like we're winding down now. So, quick plug again for the upcoming stuff. October 1st, there are still some late boat tour tickets available. Sundays all through October will be at Graceland Cemetery, plus Saturday morning, October the 2nd. Plus, there's going to be Devil Downtown tours. There's going to be some ghost tours. There's Architecture of Mysterious Chicago. You can find all of it on the newly slightly redesigned MysteriousChicago.com. Next virtual tour will be Sunday. We'll probably have some morning mini tours. Tomorrow, I don't know what's going to happen because I got to be on a meeting. But next one, Sunday morning, Riverwalk, the South Branch, will be hitting Union Station, as a matter of fact. And on Thursday night, a week from today, Rose Hill Cemetery off the route. Not unlike today, but with Rose Hill instead of Graceland. I've had a few drinks by now. But everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I will see many of you in 8 days. I will see many of you, I hope, tomorrow morning, but we'll find out. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying stay safe, stay strong, and if you can, of course, stay spooky, everybody.